Discover the Apostle Paul's untold secrets, biblical truths that haunt believers today. The skies turned black as a storm approached, mirroring the turmoil within the hearts of those gathered in the small, dusty church. Whispers of hidden truths and unfathomable mysteries tangled in the air like a thick fog. What happened in that sacred space went beyond mere sermons, it touched on the very fabric of faith itself. Many believed Paul was not just an apostle but a prophet touched by the divine, a visionary whose words bore a weight that echoed through the ages. But what if there were dark secrets buried in the shadows of his teachings, secrets that could crumble the very foundations of belief? As the congregation listened, just outside the window, a sudden flash of light tinged with a strange violet hue caught everyone's eye. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving the flickering candle flames shivering in uncertainty. A sense of dread washed over the crowd, their breaths hitching in unison. Parents clutched their children tighter, and elderly hands trembled on worn chairs. The air was thick with unspoken fears. What if Paul had left behind more than just letters? What if he had hidden a warning, a cryptic prophecy waiting to unravel? An old woman, her face etched with lines of worry, whispered, "They say the last words you speak carry your truth." What truth did Paul harbor? The murmur of the crowd simmered to a hush, like a tide pulling back before the storm. A tall figure stood up, his voice echoing in the silence. "Brothers and sisters, the time has come to unveil Paul's deepest secrets." He paused, the tension in the room so palpable that it felt like the pressure of the storm outside ready to break. And just like that, he gripped the parchment tightly, a trembling hand revealing the inked words that glowed eerily under the flickering lights. "Beware the shadows of your faith." Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. As the words sank into the hearts of the listeners, a chilling wind swept through the church, extinguishing the candles one by one. A collective gasp rose, eyes wide in disbelief. The figure continued, "What if Paul's teachings were warning us of a greater evil?" The unease in the room thickened, like the darkness that clung to the corners. Outside, thunder rumbled ominously, the ground shaking slightly beneath their feet. Questions hung in the air, unresolved and heavy. The faint sound of rustling leaves began to echo like whispers of the past. Was someone listening? Watching? A shadow flickered at the door, blurring the line between history and the present. The crowd leaned closer. Could it be? The secrets of Paul weren't just ancient words and letters, they were living, breathing mysteries demanding to be unearthed. And with each heartbeat, the tension grew thicker, the storm outside crashing harder as if warning them of the secrets abandoned but not forgotten. What lurked in those shadows, waiting for the light of truth to be cast upon them? The tall figure, now almost shadow-like, raised the parchment higher, the glow cast upon his face revealing a mixture of determination and fear. "We must confront what lies beneath Paul's words." His voice oscillated between urgency and dread, causing shivers to race through the assembled crowd. Gasps echoed through the small church, unease washing over the congregation like a tidal wave. The flickering candle flames danced wildly, casting unsettling shadows across the faces of the worshippers strained with curiosity and terror. In that moment, a seemingly unbreakable bond formed, the collective fright binding them closer together. Thundering outside, the storm unleashed its fury, sending pellets of rain against the rotting wooden and gravel-strewn roof. A soft whimper sounded from a corner, drawing attention away from the speaker. A child clung to his mother's skirt, eyes brimming with tears and uncertainty. The mother whispered soothing words, but they felt hollow amidst the rising chaos. The figure continued, "You see, Paul's journey was not merely about spreading the gospel. It was also a battle, his faith a shield against unseen adversaries. Each letter he wrote hid layers, a preservation of warnings for us, today." With those words, the old parchment revealed another line, scrawled in hurried strokes. The true threat lies not out in the world but within yourselves. Gasps erupted anew, some faces pale with fear while others transformed into masks of disbelief. Whispers of doubt flickered through the crowd like the dying light of the candles. What kind of darkness? Someone shouted from the back, frustration cracking their voice. Thunder rumbled, almost in response, shaking the walls and sending another chill trickling through the small assembly. The figure responded with an air of gravitas. A darkness that deceives and blinds. It coaxes you to forget your grounding, weaving false hopes into ideals we hold dear. It taunts your soul, demanding blind loyalty while eroding faith from within. Beware of unchallenged belief. His words hung heavy, haunted by the looming storm outside that felt more like an impending war than nature's wrath. Faces glimmered with flickers of realization, yet others remained oblivious, consumed by disbelief. Suddenly, the shadows near the church doorway grew darker. As the congregation turned to glance, the door creaked open. Faint violet light spilled into the room, casting an eerie glow that warped their surroundings. A figure stood there, cloaked in darkness, the outline almost familiar, yet distinctly unsettling. The air grew tight, breaths hitched, frozen in time. "Is it him?" someone murmured. "Is it Paul?" The voice cracked, uncertain as the figures moved closer. What commanded their attention was not merely the figure's presence, but the aura of dread it carried. The candles flickered wildly, casting a chaotic dance of light and darkness, blurring the lines of reality and haunting memory. The tall figure, previously speaking, took a step back. "No, it cannot be." His words trembled with disbelief and apprehension. Before anyone could respond, the cloaked figure raised a hand, gestures powerful enough to silence the most fearful whispers. An ancient voice rang out, echoing off the walls of the church. "Seek the truth buried deep and embrace the shadows in your hearts. Only then you shall find your freedom." As the last word faded, a deafening crash resounded like the clap of fate itself. The lights flickered and went out entirely, plunging them into total darkness. Screams erupted, hearts raced, and fear pulsated through the crowd. Then came silence that eye and the stillness. A single thought surged: had Paul truly warned them of such darkness? What revelations were about to unfold, reaching beyond the grave? The storm raged louder, itself demanding answers, but who would dare seek them now? The silence enveloped the church like a suffocating blanket. Heartbeats thundered in each chest, the only sound bridging the abysmal void. Panic danced on the edges of consciousness, lacing every breath with a hint of desperation. The air felt electric, charged with untold mystery. "Stay close!" a voice shouted from the darkness, cutting through the tension. It was the tall figure, his form barely distinguishable, but the authority in his tone resonated like a beacon. "We need to regroup. Move to the front." Shuffling footsteps filled the space, mixed with anxious whispers. The flickering candlelight returned, stuttering back to life with newfound vigor. In the dim glow, faces appeared drawn and pale. Eyes darted about nervously, searching for reassurance among their own. What did that voice mean? Someone gasped. What truth? What shadows? An elderly man, his face lined by years of worry, spoke up. It spoke about embracing darkness. What if it's a trap? A trick to lead us astray? A woman beside him shook her head, her voice trembling. Or a challenge to face what we fear most? Wouldn't Paul have wanted us to confront lies buried within us? Unease surged through the crowd like a tidal wave, but the tall figure raised his hand once more, silencing them. Listen. The shadows aren't just outside, they live inside each one of us. Paul's warnings didn't just reflect on outside forces but called us to face our failures, our fears. The palpable fear morphed into something raw: vulnerability. Members of the congregation began to exchange uneasy glances, like prisoners caught within their own torments. The storm continued its relentless assault, but the once dreaded rumbles now felt more like echoes of their shared pain. Just as clarity nudged its way into some souls, a sickening smell invaded the air. It was something rotten, cloying like decay. Murmurs erupted, as fear clawed its way back into their throats. "Do you smell that?" A voice trembled from the back. The crowd froze, a collective gasp stealing the very air around them. As if responding to their rising terror, the violet light flickered and pulsed ominously in the corner of the room. Was it a trick of the mind? Or something more sinister? One brave member took a step towards the source, eyes squinting in the unfamiliar glow. "What is happening? Is anyone out there?" An answer came this time, not in the form of a voice but a figure materialized from the violet haze. The entity was slender and tall, and as it moved closer, eyes locked onto its gaze. They were void, as though someone had stripped the soul away, leaving behind a chilling shell. "What have you brought to light?" It hissed, each word dripping with malice. A wave of horror swept through the assembly. The tall figure stepped forward, voice steady yet taut with fear. "We seek answers." "Who are you?" "Merely a reflection of what you avoid," the shadow whispered, "and what you refuse to admit. Would you like to know your truest selves?" A collective breath was held, an eerie stillness sweeping the room again. The storm seemed to quiet, as if the world paused in anticipation of the answer, the revelation that could spell doom or salvation. "Face me," it continued, "and know the depth of your souls. But remember, sometimes knowledge is a curse and may lead to your undoing." A challenge hung in the air, palpable and insidious, wrapping around them like the storm outside. Would they dare to confront their own darkness? What truths awaited them if they did? The congregation's courageous whispers began to rise. Stepping closer to the shadow's edge, they faced the fear building inside. Some recoiled, but others pressed on, fueled by an unshakable hope for truth. Suddenly, a thunderous crash echoed from behind the church, causing everyone to spin toward the source. Were they merely about to unlock the shadows, or had they awoken something they'd never be able to put back to rest? Bated breaths followed an uncertain silence. Would they find light in the darkness? Or would darkness consume them whole? The answers were out in the storm and they could feel the reckoning fast approaching. The crowd turned, eyes wide, hearts racing. Fear knotted their stomachs. What had that crash meant? Was it another trick of the storm, or was something terrible lurking just beyond the church doors? The violet figure, swirling with shadows, seemed to take advantage of the chaos, feeding off their dread. "Don't look away," the tall figure ordered, voice trembling but firm. "We cannot let it divide us." As thunder rumbled again, reverberating like an impending omen, the dark entity pulsated in the flickering light. Its gaze remained fixed on the congregation, and for a moment, it felt like it was drawing power from their fear, gathering strength in the confusion that boiled in the air. "Embrace your truths," it hissed, silky smooth yet taunting. "You fear what lies hidden in the corners of your hearts. Are you prepared to face it? Are you prepared to lose everything?" A gasp rippled through the crowd. The air thickened, each word drenching them in dread. Would they really dare to confront their deepest fears? "We have to hold on to each other," a young woman whispered, reaching for the hands of an elderly Yuan beside her. "We can't let it isolate us." One by one, others began to clasp hands, a human chain forming against the encroaching darkness. The tall figure took a few steps forward, his brows set in determination. "We are united in this. What we face here is not just a challenge, it's a chance to understand ourselves better. We cannot be afraid." With each passing second, the violet light flickered like a heartbeat of the church. It cast shadows that danced, warping the walls into grotesque shapes. Some members shuddered, a chill racing down their spines. Then another crash, this time from the opposite direction, tore through the silence. The doors of the church burst open with an explosive force. Wind howled in, bringing with it leaves, debris, and something far worse, a cold, biting essence that sent shivers racing through everyone. "What now?" someone shouted, panic cracking their voice. "Stay together." The tall figure urged again, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Do not let fear dictate our actions. In that heartbeat of chaos, a soft sob emerged from the back. A girl, no older than 16, stepped forward, her face streaked with tears. I can't do this. What if we're not strong enough? Her anguish reverberated in the close space, and some immediately turned their attention to her. We must be strong. For Paul. For ourselves. Another voice cried out. As if ignited by her vulnerability, a wave of resolve blossomed in the crowd. People began to voice their fears out loud, raw and unfiltered. I hate myself for what I've done. I've lied. I'm a coward. I betrayed someone I loved. Each confession broke the tentative silence, and with it, the church seemed to swell, enveloping their collective pain. The violet figure watched, intrigued, allowing their truths to seep into the air, growing deeper. Here lies your power, it whispered, although its tone grew more desperate. Embrace your failure, your cowardice, your betrayal. Only then will you unlock the doors to your own salvation. Tension crackled, and shadows coiled tighter around the congregation, eager to swallow them whole. They could feel it, the weight of their shadows rising. Would they fall into despair, or would they stand firmly, despite the chance that the truths they revealed could destroy them? With a shaking breath, the tall figure raised his voice once again. We can transform this darkness into light. We have to believe in what's left of us. And in that moment, as the storm roared, the flickering candles shone defiantly. The congregation stood, hearts pounding, trembling as they braced themselves for the unknown. Could the clashing forces of light and darkness usher in peace, or would they perish in their wake? But before their courage could manifest, a horrifying wail shattered the air. It curled around them like a noose, leaving a choking silence in its aftermath. What lied behind those doors would decide their fates, and the revelation was imminent. What have we awakened? Someone murmured, their voice barely audible over the pounding rain. The dark entity smiled knowingly, and in that chilling moment, the congregation held their breath, unified in fear, standing on the brink of a revelation that could shatter everything they ever believed. Would their courage prevail? Or had the shadows truly won? Only the storm would tell, and the answers were too close to grasp. The wail echoed through the church, close and thunderous, as if the very walls were reverberating with agony. Fear tightened its grip on the congregation, and the flickering candles bowed in surrender to the storm. The tall figure stood at the forefront, a lone pillar against the tide of terror, yet doubt gnawed at him, a waitress with her hands full of plates during a dinner rush, precariously balancing hope and despair. What was that? Someone gasped, their voice quivering like a leaf in a gale. The dark entity, swirling ominously, seemed to revel in the chaos. They fear me, it purred, its voice dripping with sinister anticipation. But nothing compares to the fears that dwell within each of you. Beneath the creeping shadows, people clutched one another's hands tighter. A father held his young daughter close, her wide eyes filled with innocent terror. Stay with me, he whispered, the tremor in his voice betraying his own fear. The tall figure stepped forward, heart pounding in his chest. We must confront it. Together. But deep inside, he felt the cold fingers of doubt. What if their truths weren't enough? What if standing together only led to greater despair? Just then, a flash of lightning illuminated the dark corners of the church, and in that instant, hope flickered visibly before vanishing into shadows. With each heartbeat, the storm outside intensified, as if the heavens were weeping for the fragile souls within. Another wave crashed against the doors, shaking the very foundation of their sanctuary. I can't face this. A man yelled, his voice rising in desperation, panic gripping the room anew. Do not fragment. The tall figure commanded, but his own voice cracked. The air in the room was heavy, every whispered confession a weight on their chests. We have to stand firm. It's our only chance. But the darkness stirred. Shadows spilled like ink, stretching toward the group as the entity whispered venomous truths. You are nothing without your secrets. Nothing but the sum of your lies and regrets. Embrace it, or let it consume you. As their fears pulsed in the atmosphere, the girl with tear-streaked cheeks appeared to glow in defiance. "I may be scared," she called out, her voice trembling yet steady, "but I refuse to let fear dictate my heart. I believe in us." The energy shifted slightly, as if her bravery sent a shiver through the entity. A ripple of murmured solidarity followed her declaration. "We believe. Together." Each voice seemed to lift, pushing back against the encroaching dread, then the wail returned, sharper this time, dragging the weight of each confession into the fray. The gathering thunder roared outside, a cacophony filling the silence left by their collective acknowledgement. The walls pulsed as if they lived and breathed alive with the pain they had unleashed. Suddenly, the doors groaned under the weight of something immense. The figure turned, eyes darting toward the entrance where shadows writhed and twisted in anticipation. Just behind the door, too muffled to hear clearly, sounds of heavy breathing and rustling filled the air, a portent of what was to come. "What is out there?" The question exploded from a corner, panic surging again. The violet figure laughed softly, dark satisfaction oozing from its every word. "What if I told you what waits outside? Isn't just a shadow, but a revelation?" A collective gasp filled the room, and tension grew thicker than the air. They exchanged fearful glances, hearts pounding against their chests. What awaited them on the other side? And more importantly, what unveiled truths would shatter their already fragile reality? As the door began to buckle, a soft, almost desperate voice broke through the din. "Someone needs to open it, but who?" With hope fading and darkness awaiting, the figure took a deep breath, realizing that the answer was nestled within them all along. "We will face it. We must unveil the truth for Paul's sake." But before he could seize the moment, the door burst open with a mighty crash, revealing a blinding light that filled the entire space. The entity screeched, a sound both furious and terrified. What plunged forth from the light? What truth lay in wait? The congregation held their breath, standing on a precipice ready for both salvation and destruction. And as the air screamed around them, one excruciating question rang out: were they ready to face the truth, no matter the cost? The blinding light engulfed the church, washing over each member like an electrifying wave. The tall figure squinted against its brilliance, barely able to discern shapes within the luminosity. There was a moment, a heartbeat where silence reigned, a stillness that felt sacred and terrifying. Then, from the light stepped a figure, draped in robes that shimmered. At first glance, it looked like a saint, but as the brilliance dimmed, the congregation saw the details: eyes filled with sorrow and wisdom, a face shadowed by uncertainty. This wasn't the picture of salvation they expected. Who are you?" someone asked, voice wavering, as if testing the air before them. The being paused, its gaze sweeping across the fearful assembly. "I am Paul," it declared, voice steady yet echoing with a painful weight. "I come not to save, but to share the truths the living must confront." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Paul?" they whispered, suddenly torn between reverence and disbelief. This was the very same Paul whose letters shaped doctrine, whose every word had been pored over by theologians. Yet here he was, illuminated but somehow distressed. "I was once a man driven by fear," Paul continued, stepping closer, the golden sheen illuminating his features. "My spirit was shackled by guilt, weighed down by my past. But through my own journey, I learned that the truth, no matter how agonizing, is the path to freedom." With each trembling footstep, he approached the figure who seemed resolute yet quaking with uncertainty. "You must prepare yourselves," Paul warned, gesturing toward the others. "The revelations are not merely mine to tell, they belong to each of you, woven through your own lives." "What do you mean?" The tall figure spoke, voice cracking. "What do we have to face?" Suddenly, the storm outside roared again, slamming against the walls. The darkness shifted, almost as if the entity was feeding off the fear sparked by Paul's words. "The shadows you fear are nothing compared to the weight of your own truths," it hissed, its voice bitter like a tainted breeze. Paul raised a hand, silencing the entity's taunts. "I was once blinded by my past actions. You're grappling with echoes of your own. Fear is a cruel bind, but it can also help you recognize the shadows within. You must confront the darkness you harbor, or it will devour you. The weight of his statement hung in the air, thickening. A woman in the back began to weep, her quiet sobs echoing ominously in the tense silence. "I have so many regrets," she cried. "Can I be forgiven?" Paul nodded, his gaze firm yet compassionate. "Each step toward truth is a step toward healing. Embrace what you hide, accept that even the darkest facets of your soul are parts of your journey. They make you human." The congregation began to shift, the tension fracturing like glass. Secrets once clutched tightly in fists began to break loose, whispered confessions stealing breaths. "I cheated," a man stammered, hands trembling. "I've been unfaithful. I lost my brother, and it's my fault." Another cried out, guilt spilling out like a floodgate had opened. With each admission, the shadows grew restless. The entity howled in fury. "You think truth will save you? It's a weapon to be used against you. Embrace despair instead." But the crowd pressed on, fueled by Paul's steady presence. They shared their fears and regrets, lifting burdens off their chests. The atmosphere began to shift as acceptance mingled with bravery, pushing against the dark. "Now," Paul said, voice rising above the chaos, "you must face it." Together suddenly, the entity lunged toward them, swirling menacingly, igniting a battle for hope and clarity. But just as the colliding forces reached a fever pitch, Paul's gaze turned steely, and he shouted, "You can do this. Stand together." As the waves of shadows lunged forward, the tall figure felt something shift inside him, a flicker of strength. But would it be enough? Would they conquer their fears? Would they really stand united against a truth that threatened to tear them apart? A loud crack echoed, and the light flickered as the struggle intensified. In that moment, one thought flashed through the tall figure's mind: what if the others, rattled by confessions, weren't ready for the ultimate truth that Paul had to reveal, the truth that could change everything? The shadows roiled, twisting and writhing like a beast seeking to consume them all. The atmosphere pulsed with a tension that felt almost tangible. Paul stood firm, light still shimmering around him, while chaos threatened to swallow the very church they had gathered in. "Together," he shouted, his voice breaking through the cacophony. "Strength lies in unity. Embrace your truths, and they will set you free." But the tall figure felt the pressure mounting, fear knotting tighter in his chest. He stole a glance at the woman who had first started to weep. Her face was now etched with anguish, the pale light illuminating the terror in her eyes. What if she and the others couldn't accept the depths of their own darkness? The soft whispers of confession now echoed louder, rising against the malevolent screeches of the entity circling them. The tall figure's heart raced. What about his own secrets? The shadows flickered in his mind, a reminder of all he'd tried to forget. In that instant, an unshakable doubt gripped him. Would the truth he had hidden be too much for him to bear? Just then, a chilling gale swept through the broken church, rattling the very foundations like the wrath of the heavens had descended. "Face it." Paul's voice trembled, though unyielding. "You are not alone in this fight." With an instinct he couldn't explain, the tall figure stepped forward, encouraged by the flicker of strength that had ignited moments ago. Behind him, murmurs rose, people searching each other's eyes, energy shifting as they felt the collective weight of their confessions. Suddenly, the entity surged forth, curling wisps of darkness against the congregation, the air thick with dread. "You think this will save you?" it hissed. "You think your truths are your salvation? Only despair will yield power." "Enough!" Paul bellowed, raising his arms as if to shield them from the encroaching darkness. "Despair is a liar. Look at one another. See the strength forged in shared pain." The frightened whispers began to transform, resonating into something more powerful. A man shouted, "I lost my job, because I was too proud to ask for help." A ripple of solidarity surged, emboldening others to find their voices. "I hurt my family, my anger pushed them away," cried another, and with each revelation, the light around Paul flickered brighter, pushing back the darkness, but deep within the shadows, a low growl emerged, forcing sputtered breaths back into the throats of the congregation. The tall figure felt the weight of their unacknowledged truths bearing down upon him, a crushing fear mingled with a desperate need for redemption. Shadows seemed to spiral toward him, reaching with menacing fingers that caressed his skin, sending chills racing along his spine. "Move!" Paul shouted to the congregation, rallying them further. "We must never grow complacent. Stand united." Confessions flowed like a rushing river, churning the very air around them. The room vibrated with raw emotion, but the shadows seemed unyielding, pushing harder against that fragile hope, threatening to snuff out the light once and for all. As the tall figure caught sight of Paul's expression, a mixture of fierce determination and sorrow, he understood that this battle wouldn't just reveal their truths. There was something bigger at stake. That hit him then, a realization so startling it nearly buckled his knees. What if their truths were merely the beginning? "Paul!" he called out, voice piercing through the chaos. "What else do we need to face?" Paul's gaze locked with his, burning with an intensity that promised understanding but also foreboding. "What you fear most, is yet to come." The shadows erupted, crashing into the light, and just as the darkness threatened to engulf everything, a blinding flash erupted from the center. Everything went white. In that overwhelming brilliance, the tall figure gasped, heart pounding loudly in his chest. What lay ahead? What was the ultimate truth that Paul was hinting at? As the blinding light dimmed, uncertainty crawled into his mind, but so did a flicker of hope. What if they could battle together against the shadows within? But then came the feeling, cold and lingering, what if the truth that awaited them wasn't what they thought? Would they truly be ready for the darkness that was yet to be revealed? The light faded gradually, revealing a scene charged with a different kind of tension. The tall figure blinked against the dimness, struggling to regain focus. Around him, the congregation appeared transformed. Some stood frozen, their faces ghastly, as if confronted by their own reflections in a shattered mirror. Others clenched their fists, defiance sparking in their eyes, but beneath that, fear curled like smoke. "Stay strong," Paul urged, though his voice wavered, echoing hollowly in the air. "This is a new beginning, but we must stay vigilant." As if in response, the shadows twisted and curled further around the congregation, thick and sinister, forming monstrous figures that loomed and lunged. The tall figure felt them icy whispers brushing against his skin, tearing at the seams of his resolve. They knew his secrets, tasted the regret he had buried for so long. Face the darkness, he screamed, the verification of his own confession spilling out unbidden. Face the truth. All at once, something shifted. The darkness faltered, if only for a moment. The woman's voice broke through the agonizing din. "I left him. I thought betrayal was my path to freedom." Her words rang out like a bell, shattering the thick air. The shadows flinched, as though struck. "You're not alone." A frail man's voice followed. "I ignored my child's pain because it reminded me of my own." Each confession fed a fire, each voice another blade against the onslaught of darkness. The tall figure turned towards Paul, whose eyes gleamed with a fierce light now, reflecting a clarity of purpose. It was then that the tall figure felt a powerful connection reignite in the room, something primal, something sure. Was it the collective weight of their confessions uniting them? "As we uncover our truths," Paul stated, voice steady now, "we step into the light. But the shadows will retaliate. We must brace for the storm." The shadows lunged forward again, rippling like a predator unleashed. The air crackled with anger and despair. A woman shrieked as thick tendrils of darkness wrapped around her arms, pulling her down into the abyss. Others instinctively rushed to help, but their efforts were met with pain, screams of anguish mixing with the shadows' shrill laughter. "No. We can't falter," Paul shouted, a determination burning brighter than the darkness itself. "Your light is more powerful than any fear." The tall figure found himself compelled, stepping closer to the core of the chaos. He raised his hands, feeling a surge of energy pooling in his chest, igniting as each person shared their truth. They were drawing strength from one another, amplifying their voices against the encroaching shadows. But what lay beneath their courage? Amidst the chaos, a haunting thought whispered in the back of his mind: what if this unity could not withstand the weight of their individual truths? What if the shadows concealed more than just their regrets? The ground shook beneath their feet, a roar of fury echoed through the space as if the darkness were a living thing fighting to keep them ensnared. Find that light within. Paul's shout grew frantic, resonating against the crushing darkness. Let it burn brightest. With one last breath, the tall figure summoned every ounce of courage he had left. I can't let the shadows win. We need to face whatever lies ahead, together. But just as he rallied his thoughts, an echo reverberated through the church, icy and brittle. You think you've faced your darkness? You are mistaken. The voice was familiar, sending tremors of dread through him. The shadows drew back momentarily, revealing a figure cloaked in dark robes, standing at the threshold of light. What does it want? He thought, dread pooling in the pit of his stomach. Why did it seem so intimately connected to him? Tell me what else we must face. He called, desperation creeping into his voice as uncertainty washed over him, and as the cloaked figure smirked, the shadows swirled tighter around them, a haunting promise shrouded in darkness, their true test just beginning. What had they really awakened? And would they ever uncover the truth hidden behind the shadows that loomed like a storm on the horizon? The cloaked figure hesitated before stepping into the flickering light, its face obscured by the deep cowl. A whisper of recognition clawed at the back of the tall figure's mind. Was it a familiar face merely hidden, or something much darker? What do you want from us? He shouted again, his voice ringing against the walls, which felt like they were closing in. The congregation seemed to hold their breath, eyes darting between the tall figure and the dark stranger, fear painting their faces into masks of uncertainty. You've stirred the shadows, Haven Tu. The figure cooed, its voice smooth and dripping with malice. And now you'll face the consequences. Behind the figure, shadows writhed, taking grotesque forms, as if they were hungry for anything that dared to resist. They pulsated with rage, claw-like hands grasping at the air, ready to pounce on any whiff of fear or hesitation. Paul stepped forward, defiance etched into his features. We face our truths together. We won't let your darkness consume us. A cruel laugh erupted from the shadowed figure, reverberating around the room like a sinister chorus. Together? How quaint. But have you ever wondered what truths lie beneath your bravado? Each secret is a tether. Every lie binds you to the shadows. The harder you fight against them, the stronger they become. A wave of anxiety swept through the congregation. The tall figure sensed it, a ripple of uncertainty that twisted in their bellies, tightening their chests. Were they truly prepared for this kind of confrontation? The cloaked figure seemed to glean their hesitation, its smile widening. I shall show you. Suddenly, figures from the past emerged from the darkness, manifesting from the very shadows that surrounded them. One by one, the haunting visages materialized, faces from forgotten memories, lost loves, buried regrets. Is that? The tall figure froze as he recognized the first apparition, an old friend with a hollow expression, eyes reflecting betrayal. No. But before he could bring any more words, the next figure materialized, a woman he once loved, disappointment etched in the lines of her face. You abandoned me, she whispered, her voice an echoing lament. No. It was like that. He pleaded, but the words felt lost. The shadows tightened around him, feeding off his despair. That he turned to the crowd, desperation clawing at his throat. They're not real. Fight against it. We're stronger than our past. Their eyes were wide, confusion swirling among them. Each specter seemed to pull a piece of their courage, revealing their vulnerabilities, their deepest fears. The air thickened, suffocating with the weight of unconfessed guilt and regret. Remember, the shadows know your secrets. The cloaked figure taunted, laughing as it watched the members of the congregation struggle against their encroaching despair. Face it. You cannot hide from the truth forever. The tall figure felt a surge of urgency, a spark igniting within him. It was now or never. Summoning the energy they had built through shared confessions, he raised his hands. We will face you. Together, we can expose the lies. The collective pulse of their fears began to shift, though the shadows fought fiercely against the light. One by one, voices rose, stronger this time. We'll face this head-on. Together. Paul shouted, a rallying cry that shook the very air around them. Yet even as they united, the cloaked figure seemed unperturbed, a glint of malice danced in its eyes. You think this is unity? I'll show you the chasms between your truths. The shadows darkened and twisted, gathering into a tempest that threatened to devour all hope. The tension surged, every heartbeat echoing in the vastness of the church. Could they truly confront the demons that lingered just beyond? Just as despair began to feel overwhelming, the air cracked around them, a promise of impending chaos loomed. Your truths may bind you, but I will make them your undoing, the cloaked figure hissed, extending its arm, as tendrils of darkness surged forth, ready to strike. The tall figure gripped his chest, a lump forming in his throat. What will happen now? He wondered. And in that moment, he sensed that the real battle was about to begin, an unforeseen reckoning that would test not only their courage but their very souls. They were left hanging at the edge, watching shadows spiral and dance as if poised to consume everything they held dear. What secrets would unfold? What sacrifices would be demanded? The answers lay just beyond the horizon of their fears. The church was alive with chaotic energy, shadows swirling as the cloaked figure twisted the air with taunts and threats. The congregation stood huddled together, heartbeats crashing in unison, minds racing as they faced not just a dark presence but the personal specters that haunted them. The tall figure could see the tremors of doubt flicker across their faces, but deep inside him dwelled a flicker of determination, a sense that even in the depths of despair, hope could be found. Paul's voice rang out once more, firm and resolute. Remember why we're here. Each of you has the right to embrace your truth, to expose what lurks in the shadows. As if his words were a rallying banner, the crowd began to hold hands tighter, a chain of humanity brimming with a single fierce belief. They were more than their pasts. The cloaked figure let out a cackling laugh, its glee a taunting echo reverberating off the church walls. Is that so? Then let us see your truths. Let us peel back the layers of shame and see what you truly are. With a swift motion, shadows flared out, snatching at the ankles of the congregation, latching onto their fears and pulling them deeper into a vortex of despair. Do not let it distract you. The tall figure shouted, his voice rising above the fray. Breathe. Don't succumb to the darkness. Remember our confessions. Remember who we are now. And they did. One voice broke through, passionate and raw. I bear the weight of my choices. A man spoke up, tears streaming down his face, his arms shaking, yet he stood firm. I refuse to let my regrets choke my spirit any longer. Others joined in, voices merging into a powerful symphony. I lost my way, but I'm finding it again. I will not hide from the pain I've caused. The words erupted like fireworks against the sullen dark, cascading into colorful bursts of strength. The shadows reacted, writhing in discontent as each proclamation shattered their hold. The cloaked figure faltered, eyes narrowing in disbelief. This won't save you. It screamed, yet it felt desperation creeping into its voice. Paul's presence remained steady, a lighthouse amidst the storm. Your truths are your strength. Together, they illuminate the path to liberation. Gradually, the dark tendrils released their grip, retreating from the light ignited by the confessions. The church pulsed with renewed energy, each collective voice amplifying the flicker of resistance within. The tall figure felt an unyielding resolve grow, intertwining with each declaration shared, lifting him higher above the abyss of doubt. Keep going. He urged, sensing the power building as even the shadows started to ebb, revealing a glimpse of hope amid chaos. We cannot afford to falter now. Just as the air thickened with anticipation, the cloaked figure surged forward, a wave of cloaked rage. What you think is power is an illusion. I can still make you crumble. With a snap of its fingers, shadows lashed out at those holding hands, desperate to sever their bond, but the tall figure pulled on the strength of the group around him. We are not alone. Together, we will rise. Fueled by a surge of warmth, they pushed back against the entity's reach. The shadows shuddered, losing solidity, as each heartbeat melded with collective purpose. As the congregation unleashed a deafening cry, the barrier held firm, forcing back the dark entity inch by inch. Paul stepped forward, light radiating from him, casting long shadows that stretched and leaned into the darkness. Your secrets cannot hold power over you anymore. Embrace the truth and let it shine. With each confession, with each passionate shout for freedom, the cloaked figure wailed, "No. Stop this." But it was too late. The vibrancy of hope ripped through the veil of shadows, pulling the congregation into the brilliance of light that poured down from above like a torrential wave. The room erupted in an avalanche of brightness, illuminating every corner, scattering the darkness into oblivion. The figure crumpled, the walls vibrating with a final, furious cry as it was cast into the far reaches of nothingness. The church shook, the storm outside diminishing, replaced by a profound stillness. They stood together, breathless, eyes wide, engulfed in their newfound freedom, the weight of ancient secrets dissipating into the warm glow. Paul's gaze softened as the congregation began to recognize one another anew, faces reflecting a blend of relief and triumph. You've faced your darkness and emerged stronger. Hold on to this moment. Let it guide you forward. The tall figure, heart swelling with gratitude, felt a kinship blend with joy. We did this together. He turned to the others, smiles dawning and souls mending. In the quiet that followed, hope danced in the air, alive and precious. We can't forget what we learned, a woman murmured, her face wet with tears, but the warmth of laughter began to weave through the crowd, mapping a landscape of healing. And at that moment, they realized, they weren't merely survivors of shadows, they were bearers of light forged in fire. Paul's presence shimmered, beginning to fade, yet his voice anchored them all. Remember the truth you've unearthed. It's a lantern for the journey ahead. As the church bathed in soft morning light, the people stepped forward, hearts aligned with purpose. They had crossed the threshold into a new beginning. Let us go change the world, the tall figure said, a smile breaking free of his face, and hand in hand, they walked out into a world no longer obscured by darkness but washed in possibility, a world where the whispers of their truths echoed louder than the shadows of their past, and just like that, they turned the page on a new chapter. So now, here's a call to action: you need to subscribe now. Don't miss out on more exclusive stories that will shake you to your core. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm. We want to hear every thought in the comments section. Flood it with your reactions and theories about this ending. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Show your true support for our journey together.